Where's Rihanna?
He ain't coming,
What?
Ryan.
Oh.
All right, I'm going to start. Hello and welcome to Talking TWAMPs. This is our first episode this semester. Hello and welcome to our show. My name is Jonathan Vincent Tandau. I will be your host for today. Before we talk about some of the most interesting current event topics this time around, let's introduce ourselves, starting from the person to my right.
That's me. My name is Jacob Cordes. I am a senior at the college here, and I'm ready for this to be over. We're talking about Brexit. Vince didn't say that, but I am so ready for this thing to be over, man.
All right, I'm Sam. You may remember me from the best episode that was previously on Talking TWAMPs. I'm also a senior, and yeah, I don't really know. This is like episode 4 of Brexit or whatever. Yeah, it's 4. It's like Indiana Jones 4. Some of us are gonna have heads that are just not the proper dimensions.
They just get worse and worse. It's like, oh god.
Who of us is gonna be Shia LaBeouf swinging on the vines of the monkeys?
Okay, I am William Moore, senior here at the College of William and Mary, studying government and economics. And yeah, I didn't think we would still be talking about this. I thought we would be talking about like the fallout and like Ireland being like unified or something at this point.
The new British Civil War. That kind of thing.
Yeah. All right,
War of the
guys.
Roses too.
Oh, wait, no, we got
I'm
one
sure
more.
we will be
got
able
one
to go
more.
through that. Yes, let's talk about our Skype correspondent all the way from the distant state of Montana.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Blake Phillips, and I guess I'm now a professional hermit. So I'll be giving that sort of insider take from the very, very, very interior of the United States.
And if you're wondering why Blake sounds like he's a NPR war correspondent from an active conflict zone, well, it is Montana, so...
And I am your host.
Excuse you, these are very nice people.
Yeah, Blake is our conservative correspondent, hanging out in the middle of Montana.
And I'm your
Yeah,
host.
no kidding though.
And I'm your host, Jonathan Vincent Tandau. I too am a senior here, studying economics and data science. So, well, we've already spoiled the topic of today, but we will be talking about Brexit, part 4. Before I ask any questions, any hot takes anyone want to bring on the floor right now?
Hot
Oh
takes.
boy.
I'm going to start off with the hot takes immediately.
Yeah, are you guys...
I am so ready for Brexit. I've been ready for Brexit for a long time. I, of course, being a rational actor, do not want Brexit to happen in general. But if it's gonna happen, I'm glad that it's gonna happen real bad. Because that is some Ireland-forming material right there, my friends.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the example this sets, which is, if you're, say... Poland or Hungary, and you're thinking you'd rather do without those EU institutions. I mean, the UK has sent a message here that's like, don't even think about it. Don't even try it. You want to end up like this?
It's even worse, too, because inside the UK, this is going to have such a bad ramification in the long term. Just the way that they chose perhaps the worst possible person to be the follow-up successor to Theresa May. Boris Johnson, like, the epitome. Like, everybody always talks about how David Cameron was the epitome of what the rest of England and the United Kingdom hated about posh southern, like, English people. But Boris Johnson's, like, even worse. Because at least David Cameron, you could make some claims that he was educated. Boris Johnson just is like an idiot. And that's, like, his entire perception in the United Kingdom.
Also, he looks like Trump.
I mean, yeah,
So-
but I feel like that's, like, the less, like, not the worst part of the evils here. It's just, like... It's like, let's prorogue Parliament. Let's just be a derp the entire time.
There have been a lot of high-profile resignations, too, especially after his ridiculous claims on trying to stall Congress, right? Stall Parliament.
Well,
my
he's
bad.
proroguing Parliament, basically meaning that he's telling them you're supposed to do it in the run-up to an election, which is basically you tell the MPs, go home and start campaigning. That's what you're supposed to do with a proroga parliament. There's no election forthcoming. So he's just saying, yeah, go home.
Take a nice month-long vacation. You haven't earned it.
Yeah.
I mean, serious. And, obviously, though, if you're Boris Johnson and you more or less want a hard Brexit to happen, genius political ploy, just don't let them debate other options. I mean, they're going to come back 2 weeks before the hard Brexit deadline.
I love that they put him in charge because it fits with the pattern of decision-making that has defined this entire process. It makes absolutely no sense. Nothing that he has as a goal makes any sense because as an educated member of the wealthy elite, he only benefits from free trade. But we literally will stumble into every mistake possible, and it's like every decision that could have gone wrong is, and it's hilarious to watch.
I mean, at this point, the most salvageable outcome here is that Northern Ireland just says, hey, no, this, we kind of want to be part of Europe, and we get a unified Ireland out of this. I mean, second referendum, revoking the articles of exit or whatever by Parliament, that's off the table now, basically.
I'm just shocked, too, that honestly, I haven't read about it at all in the news, but the Dublin Unionist Party was threatening May time and time again to bring down the government if she even thought about kind of having a kind of hard border situation between both the UK but also the rest of Ireland. So it's just what's going to happen here? I'm very curious.
Yeah.
Well, that may be a part of why he prorogued Parliament. They may have been threatening him behind closed doors to shut down the government, and he said, well, that's fine, I'll do it anyway. But I'll do it in a way that technically keeps me in charge.
I mean, when it comes to the Irish backstop, it's this idea that sounds really good, right? Which is Ireland, Northern Ireland specifically, doesn't want a hard border between it and the Republic of Ireland. So you have this backstop, this backup plan that one way or another, Ireland is going to remain a unified market. And there are two ways that can happen, right? You can either have the whole UK just stays in the European Customs Union until another deal can be negotiated, or you put a customs border in the North Sea.
You're forgetting the third option that one Boris Johnson suggested, which is that Ireland leaves the European Free Trade Area and joins the UK.
That was the equivalent of when Trump said he was going to buy Greenland. No one's going to take that seriously.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about Northern Ireland and Ireland specifically and what they stand to win or lose with a very hard Boris Johnson-esque Brexit.
Well, I mean, the obvious thing that they're going to lose that is going to be a problem in the long term is the economic fluidity between the two countries, particularly for Northern Ireland, just because they have a lot of domestic industry. They don't. So it's they need to be part of a larger free trade area in order to successfully do anything. And I mean, Ireland is not going to be great either, not being able to trade easily with the United Kingdom. But they can still trade with the rest of the European Union, the 400 million person bloc.
And the rest of the world, too. I mean, we forget, the UK isn't just leaving the European Union. They're leaving every trade deal the European Union has negotiated. And when we're talking about, trade for Northern Ireland, it's not just this kind of abstract, some customs barriers are going to go up. For London, if you're a Londoner, you're not, unless you're an international businessman or something like that, you're not hopping across a national border every other day. If you live in a border community in Northern Ireland, there's a level of kind of blurring of the national border that...
Blurring doesn't even start to cover how much this border does not exist in any physical way. There are hundreds of roads from little dirt tracks to 4-lane highways that cross this thing, constantly. The last time they tried to enforce security on this border, they had to like deploy the military just on a regular basis. They had to go full on North-South Korea DMZ just to make this border a reality.
I mean, it's so weird to think about, though, that wasn't like a period from a dark time in history where we've, moved past it. That was like 20 years ago, It was
Tops.
well within living memory. And if you try and put a militarized border, or even just a normal national border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, I mean, do you enjoy car bombs? Is that what Boris Johnson is telling us?
Well, yeah. And I mean, the violence, which I'm not saying won't happen. In fact, the groups that were formerly a part of the conflict have started to see increasing membership again. So I'm sure that there will be. But it's not even... the biggest thing that's going to be impactful for most Irish people, because, I mean, realistically, the Troubles were a really, really rough time for Northern Ireland. But, like, the southern, eastern, west, I mean, even Dublin didn't really see most of that conflict. The real problem for the Northern Irish is going to be, as William referenced, their access to everyday goods. Because, I mean, the UK and mainland UK has enough sort of wealth stockpiled away that they could probably make do. But Northern Ireland is not a historically wealthy area by any means. And their loss of the ability to, I mean, literally some of them cross the border every day just to go to the grocery store. And if you lose that connection, I mean, you're suddenly in a food desert that never existed.
I mean, it kind of reveals the absurdity in a really stark way of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and the kind of, I mean, the pretense that these are two fundamentally different and separate communities or nations.
I don't know if I agree that it probably does not show that these are fundamentally different nations, but I don't know necessarily that it proves that there's an absurdity in the border there. Just what makes this such a problem and makes it such an issue is that this is a national border that has not existed for years between two incredibly dependent communities upon each other. If you tried to ram a border now, probably between certain parts of France and Germany, and, those areas of the European Union that have not seen a border for some decades, you would probably see similar economic malfunctions.
Well, I think
But it's not just... So William, you're not wrong that that's going to be a big part of the economic issue. I mean, that's going to be the big part of an economic issue between Gibraltar and Spain. But what I think Jacob accurately touched on in terms of the cultural absurdity is that this is one of the few borders drawn by an imperial power that is not in either Africa or the Middle East. And it's telling how this is also one of the only places in Europe that has experienced, insurgent violence over it, because it really is quite arbitrary. It's simply defined by county borders that didn't exist up until the time that they were drawn. And then all of a sudden, it literally split families and at times homes down the middle. And it's, I think that Jacob's correct in noting that there's not only an economic, but a huge cultural element to why this border has almost never made sense historically.
Well, okay. Do you think, trying to stay away from having this podcast turn into a doom and gloom, oh no, everything's going to, get broken after Boris Johnson.
But that's the reality.
Do you think there's a glimmer of hope somewhere? Do you think Northern Ireland or Ireland can possibly gain something from this? From this happening?
I'm particularly hopeful.
Yeah. Sam, what do you think, Sam?
That's a great question. Sorry, I got caught up. We were talking about Gibraltar. I'm going to ask that someone talk about something else real quick.
I mean, so the glimmer of hope is Irish unification. Like,
Yahoo!
If we take it as a given at this point that hard Brexit is going to happen, which, unless the Queen herself steps in and stops it from happening, that seems like the direction that the UK is going.
Well, doesn't the prorogue technically end like 2 or 3 weeks before the deadline?
Exactly 2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there is, I mean, not to pump up hopes. It's basically the same argument as the Electoral College could still elect Hillary. But it's still technically possible that within that 2 weeks, especially if he's pissed off enough ministers by proroguing them, that they could unilaterally invoke the retraction of the Article 51.
Well, yeah, actually, let's talk about the options that Parliament has in those 2 weeks between the resumption of business and the Brexit deadline.
Ooh,
and they actually do have a couple of options, right? As you mentioned, they can unilaterally revoke the exit. I believe the European High Court said if at any point Britain, their duly elected democratic bodies say, nope, we don't want to do it after all, they can just come back like nothing ever happened. But that's super unlikely, right?
Especially with Boris Johnson at the head.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
what would have to happen in that case, because it's probably not going to be a leadership power challenge inside the Conservative Party. It's going to be a vote of no confidence to bring down the government, probably headed by the Labour Party.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that even a lot of Labour MPs, who are surprisingly, some of them are pro-Brexit. They're in the kind of isolationist Labour faction. A lot of them think that the referendum, for better or for worse, was the people's will, and that we can argue about how Brexit is negotiated, what the deal is, but we do have to leave the European Union. So that's probably not going to happen. But Theresa May's deal, her European negotiated treaty, it is still available to be assumed by Parliament.
I mean, technically, but I mean, first of all, they'd have to bring it back up, which we've already noted has legislative blocks to happening. And even if they were to bring it back up, it's not like there's been a lot of ministerial swaps, you know?
Yeah.
Can we clarify what this deal is?
So this was the deal that Theresa May negotiated over a several-month period with the EU negotiators. And it had all sorts of compromises that weren't really appealing to either side.
That's how deals work, though.
Right. Ultimately, the essential thing that we need to note is that it allowed for a period in which the UK would remain in the European Customs Union until they could get their act together, basically.
It was basically the United Kingdom leaves the European Union and no longer votes in like the elections and things of that nature, but still abides by EU rules for about, I believe, a 2-year period. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure if that's correct. Until they negotiate a formal trade deal to clarify the exact conditions.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, is what this process was supposed to produce. You know, they weren't supposed to hammer out all of the nitty gritty. All right, 2 pounds of eggs need to make sure that they've been cured with enough salt to,
Yeah.
They didn't have to nail all of that out. They just needed to get a framework in place before this deadline expired.
Yeah. And so that deal was ultimately shot down by a combination of things. There were Labour and Scottish National Party MPs who were fundamentally opposed to Brexit, said, no, we're not adopting this. We're holding out for a second referendum, or we're holding out for revocation, or whatever. And then there were the hardline Brexiteers who said, no, we don't want this 2-year period. We want to be out as soon as possible. You need to get us out now.
These are the folks who, said Brexit means Brexit. I mean,
this is Boris Johnson. Look, it's Boris Johnson, and his...
Was he a hard Brexiteer right at the beginning? I know he is now, but I don't remember.
He was.
Was he? Okay.
He was from the second he left Theresa May's cabinet.
So, looking outside of that area, do you think this could have any political implications? Say, Catalonia, again, trying to separate themselves, or other, difficult parts of the world trying to do the same thing?
Well, I mean, with Catalonia specifically, it actually kind of quietly flew under the radar, but after the independence kind of fizzled out, they negotiated a deal with Madrid where they got increased autonomy again for like the 5th time this has happened. I think people forget that like Catalonia asks for independence pretty regularly, basically every 20 years. And every time they get concessions from Madrid. So Catalonia...
Yeah, they're basically just going to a little bit more autonomy their way to independence. They're just going to wake up one morning and go, we are a separate nation at this point.
Yeah, there's not really any political implications for regional, movements in Europe.
Yeah.
There are implications, though, for the kind of Poland, Hungary,
Greece.
Eurosceptic bloc.
Yeah, because it really
Actually, Greece seems to have quieted down, weirdly.
Well, yeah, but I feel like it's more because they're just kind of consigned to their fate more so. I don't think there's really any pro-EU sentiment down there.
No. Greece has actually become very pro-European, at least compared to where
they sort of
were.
turned a corner. They're not pro-European sanctions, to be clear, all of the things that are on their economy, but they've realized somewhat late in the game that without the EU, they are so screwed.
Well, and there's kind of a difference between, the Hungary and Poland kind of have friction with the EU, because they have these authoritarian tendencies that are emerging, and the EU is sanctioning them over that. Greece is, for all of their weird neo-fascist parties that have emerged, still a very left-wing government. And very pro-internationalism. So Greece's Euroscepticism has always been economic in nature, and now that kind of dire strait has passed, Greece isn't really in that block.
I do think it does point, though, to kind of the issue of trying to take Brexit and the colossal just political ramifications that surround it in the United Kingdom and apply it to other countries. Because many of the Eurosceptic blocs in other countries are very specific to that country. We've kind of seen that in the European elections where, the Eurosceptic parties kind of refuse to work together because their reasons that they're Eurosceptic are sometimes completely divergent from one another. So we'll have to see how it plays out in the long term. My biggest guess of the ramifications is it kind of proves that leaving the EU is not as easy as just leaving the EU. You can say it, but it doesn't make it happen.
I mean, it can be. The British are making this artificially difficult. If they wanted to, they could just hard Brexit out. It would not be that difficult.
They have
what makes it difficult is the...
Yeah.
Sorry, am I...
No, Sam was just making a joke. Keep going.
Okay. You could easily just sort of dip out. That what is making this difficult is that it was presented as if it were a binary problem. You leave or you don't leave. But in reality, the people, even the people who organized Brexit, a lot of them always intended for this to be a negotiated process, while some of them did not. And because it was not a very coordinated approach, it was just sort of everybody yelling at each other. When it came time to actually do the work, there was no unified approach, and it's just a mess.
I suppose that's fair, but I wouldn't say that it hasn't had other ramifications, because I feel like everybody, at least in Europe, has seen the economic ramifications, or at least the projected ones on the British economy, which were, I would say, pretty gravely misrepresented by the pro-Brexit party in the United Kingdom.
So, I mean, the process of leaving could be simple, but you're absolutely right. The sort of implications of leaving are not nearly the sort of, oh, I'm out and nothing else has changed.
Well, that's what I agree, and that's what I'm saying is probably the learning process, is that most of the people who lived in other nations in the European Union and around the world didn't really understand how damaging it could be to a national economy until a nation actually attempted to leave the European Union.
Well, Sam?
For sure.
Just because, you look at, like all you got to do is take one look at, is it Dover that's, bringing in all the trucks and stuff at,
across the channel?
Yeah. It's just... Yeah, I think hard Brexit's a really easy idea when you're voting on a ballot, and then when you're I might not have food is suddenly a lot less appealing of a decision. But I think that it's I mean, this whole conversation is difficult because I think that like the ideal like solution, not the ideal solution, but like a really good solution to England's wanting to leave Brexit is that they could get a whole bunch of solid trade deals and, you know, not have to worry about borders. So like I think like the ideal solution is just the European Union, but that's like not going to happen, you know, because
well, there was this like sense, I think, when people were campaigning and voting for Brexit that Britain's exit would be a lot like its entrance to the European Union, where they sat down individually with all of the constituent nations, which there were a lot fewer at the time, and they negotiated, and they, you know, had a lot of leverage because, well, France and Germany did kind of want the UK to join it, you know.
France was reticent, but yeah.
They got around to it. And I think the UK has been surprised for no good reason, right? They should have known this. But they've been surprised to find that a single declining industrial society negotiating with an entire continent does not tend to favor the single declining industrial society.
Well, and to his credit, I think Tusk has presented a much more unified front than anybody expected. I mean, England has long been able to lean on Poland and Hungary being the sort of, you know, reluctant children in the group and sort of, you know, bullying the rest of the EU into taking more conservative or UK favorable stances. But I think that watching the economic projections, Poland and Hungary went, we're still going to have normative arguments with the EU, but when it comes to economics, sorry, Britain, we're a unified front. And I think that really threw a wrench into the plans of the Brexiteers, who I'm sure wanted to exploit, you know, rifts in the organization to get a favorable deal.
Which they could have if it was an internal debate, if it was an internal EU matter. But the second they invoked Article 50, suddenly it's an external EU matter. And, I mean, for better or for worse, I think for better, the EU has proven that it's a robust, supranational organization.
I think
at least when it comes to economics.
Yeah, I think actually who was it? I think it was the Prime Minister of Luxembourg stated this like very appropriately when he was asked by English interviewers after a EU Council session of like, would you find it acceptable or okay if the EU refused to negotiate with the United Kingdom to renegotiate the deal? And the Prime Minister of Luxembourg said yes. And they say, but you run the risk of having severe damage to the British economy. Doesn't that weigh on you all? And he's like, Brexit was your choice, not mine. I don't care what happens in your country. It's like...
So we are going to run a bit long, but I have one final question that hopefully would wrap this entire episode up. My question is, you know, lately we've been seeing a lot of, you could say, right-wing movements, quote-unquote, gain traction and claim victory. For example, you know, Trump was elected, and then you have Marine Le Pen creating a substantial challenge against Macron at that time. We have the Law and Justice Party, then we have Orban, and now we have Brexit. So do you think that with, you know, recent history, do you think there is, or I guess a more focused question would be, do you think that what's happening here in Brexit represents a criticism towards more right-wing sentiments in international politics, or do you think that people look at Brexit and say, this is why the liberal order is a lot better than what these people are saying, for example?
So are you saying, basically the question is Brexit a symptom of right-wing problems or a criticism of it?
Yeah, more or less.
I would say it's probably more of a symptom. It's a symptom of nationalistic beliefs, ultimately, at the end of the day, that Britain very much believed, for better or for worse, that it could carry on by itself, and it was better off by itself than working with the larger European Union. They felt constrained, and that's kind of what we see with Orban's as well, kind of criticizing the EU, saying, you know, we in Hungary know how to run our country, not some bureaucrat in Brussels. Kind of same thing in Poland, to a lesser extent in Greece. That it's just this belief that the nationalistic order is more capable of actually successfully and appropriately governing a country. Now, we see that in Brexit as in Britain can carry on by itself. I would say it's a symptom of it more so than it's a criticism of it.
And ending.
Sam, what do you think? Oh, Jacob first.
No, please go. No, please.
All right, let's go around the table. Let's go around the table.
No, I guess I'll make the argument that it's a criticism of it just because you made just the argument that it was a symptom of it. Because I think that. Wait, so you were asking if it was a symptom or a criticism of like rising?
Yeah, I guess in a more simple way, you can ask, if I was a right-wing person, if I believed in, say, I don't believe in the liberal order, so forth and so on, do I look at Brexit and be like, this is what should have, this is a good thing.
So you're thinking like, is the question in an even simpler form? Can you twist this as a more nationalistic-minded person that this is actually a good thing?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure that you can because we're saying that can be done with everything, at this point. But I don't know. I guess that I think, like, from a liberal perspective, which I have, I see this entire.
Are you talking about U.S. liberal perspective or like global order liberal perspective, which is like free market trade and things of that nature?
I guess I identify with both, but okay.
They just mean different things in this case. Because when we talk about the liberal global order, that's different. Because there's criticisms of the liberal global order coming from the left as well.
Yeah, agreed. So I guess coming from the
although in this case it's from Vince's right.
Yeah.
I find it hard not to look at what's going on with Brexit and see. It's hard to get past this idea of like it being just like an inherently wrong decision, and I think that in some ways it's like a good and a bad thing from my own personal perspective because I think that it's a much more nuanced and like there are things to be said for both sides of Brexit, even if like a no deal Brexit is.
Sam, are you seriously saying that there are good people on both sides of this argument?
No. I just like I think that it would be hard. It would be misguided to lose the nuance that you can have. I'm not making the Trump Charlottesville point here. Okay. But
I didn't even take it that far, but yeah, okay.
Well, no, isn't that what Blake was just saying?
That was Blake was referencing.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I think Sam makes a good point. Is that like there are nuanced arguments on both sides for why Brexit could be both good and bad.
So yeah, to speak my actual truth, I think that this should be seen as like a critique of the entire ideology behind Brexit, but that's more because of my own, like my personal beliefs, I guess is what I'm saying. Is that like I'm like this is a pretty shitty decision to make because I thought that you had it pretty good in the European Union, but then again, I'm not a citizen of the European Union, I would love to be a part of the European Union at this point because of our government, but like, it's just like I think that the way that I view Brexit at the most part is that I think that it is a pretty selfish decision by a lot of people who won't be the most impacted by the decisions surrounding Brexit. Like, I think that's
a very good way of putting that.
Yeah, I think that but I'm not like an anti-government person because you could easily twist that into like
you could be in the middle.
Like everyone in government doesn't understand how like the working class people operate, kind of thing. And I think that's like actually a larger part of like American conservative, rhetoric these days. But
Jacob?
Yeah, please.
What do you
Blake
think?
had something to interject.
Hold on, let's go around the table. I didn't forget you, Blake. Don't worry. Go on, Jacob.
So I am going to be anti-government, actually. And I'm going to say there's a word that gets bandied around a lot when we're talking about Brexit, and that's nationalism, right? People say Brexit is a symptom of nationalism gone wild. That's wrong, but not for the reason you probably think. The United Kingdom...
Professor TED Talk Jacob Cordes.
The United Kingdom...
Enlighten us.
...is not a nation. There are 4 separate nations, well, 3 nations and the ruined shard of a nation that the British shit on in the United Kingdom. And when you look at the regional breakdown of the British Brexit referendum, you see that Northern Ireland, a community which is deeply tied to the Republic, voted by a large margin to remain in the EU.
Awkwardly, not that large, but continue.
10 percentage points.
Well, yeah, but that's not as big a split as I would have liked to see.
That's pretty definitive.
All right, go on, Jacob.
Likewise, Scotland voted by a similar margin to remain in the European Union. England voted to leave by a fair margin, and Wales voted to leave by a similar margin. And the question is, if Scotland and Northern Ireland, by the admission of the United Kingdom's own laws and government structure, are nations, right? The Scottish Parliament is a national parliament. Now, obviously, the British Parliament still has a higher place in the British hierarchy, but these are nations. And we have to ask, is the United Kingdom collectively a good representative or even a fair representative of the national opinions of Northern Ireland and Scotland? And I think there are some people in both of those places that would argue that it is not. From a practical point of view, obviously, this is just a disaster for, Brexiteers. It makes them all look bad. But on a fundamental level, I do hope this is just another nail in the long-awaited coffin of the United Kingdom.
Free Scotland, 2020.
All right, Blake.
Hey.
You're the last one to speak.
Ireland's got the first ticket.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Second in line's important too. All right?
Listen, we've got a couple of months left. Free Ireland 2019.
Oh, yeah, Free Scotland 2020.
All right, I'll take that. I'm going to jump on the bandwagon of this. It sort of is, but largely speaking, is not nationalism. But I'm going to take it in a different direction. I think that the people who try to draw parallels between Trump's election and Brexit, for so many reasons, are very fundamentally correct, but for the important reason that the people who organized, who, bought hundreds of millions of dollars worth of advertisements and posters and buses and what have you, to push Brexit and the message of Brexit to the British people are, to some extent, nationalists, that or opportunists, because they've used pretty blatant nationalist rhetoric, and they pretty clearly are not a big fan of the idea of, this whole UK is under the boot heel of the EU, having to spend so much money, yada yada yada. But when you listen to interviews from people who voted for Brexit, I mean, you get a handful of nationalist responses, but the broad response that most pro-Brexiteer people give is, we need that money here. We need it to fund the NHS. We need it to fund welfare programs. Our economy isn't doing so hot already, which is interesting because much like the United States' economy after the recession, the UK's economy has bounced back. It's done fairly well. And I think that it's really much more of a symptom, not of nationalism, but of this whole idea of sort of left behind communities. That there was a simple answer. There are hundreds of billions of dollars that we could be spending to help you that we're instead giving to the EU. And it resonated with a group of people who felt that they had been left behind by their own government and by international institutions. I mean, it's the same thing we had with Donald Trump saying that we needed to rewrite NAFTA, that we needed to bring back companies, that we needed to stop paying so much money into NATO so that we could save that money for the American people. I think that what we're really looking at here is a couple of nationalist political figures who managed to weaponize an underrepresented demographic.
Wow. Yeah. That's very insightful, Blake. All right. I think this is the end of our episode. Thank you very much for all our listeners for listening to us ramble and critique and basically burn the decision of Brexit here. Before we leave, I'd like to remind listeners that we do not represent the official opinion of the College of William and Mary. We are merely editorial in nature. These views are ours and ours alone. And with that said, I hope you do like some of the things we've said today. And if you would like to listen to more of this kind of content, don't forget to find us on wherever your pods are being cast. Thank you, everyone. My name is Jonathan Vincent Tandau. We have William Moore, Sam, Jacob, and Blake here with us.